Hello, hello, and welcome to this another short video on JavaScript classes. So before we can not before we discuss the classes in detail, we will study about static methods and fields along with getter setters, and we will not yet discuss the subclasses, but we will discuss these fields and static methods along with this statement. With this statement I missed because it is not very useful. It is useful, but only under very extreme conditions. So what it does is that it creates a temporary scope with the properties of object as variables and then executes statements within that scope. So in client-side JavaScript, you can see something like document.forms0.address.value. Now to alleviate this long excess, what you can do is with the document.forms0, you can have name.value, address.value, email.value, and so on. So for example, we have a class here. We have an object here with property x is equal to 1. And to directly access the property x, you can say that without, and then console.log x will give you 1. So that is one thing. Now there are two things I wanted to talk about classes in ES6 is that class bodies by default use strict mode. So with you cannot use in the class body. Okay. The second difference is that class declarations are not hosted like function declarations. So for example, we have a class range here and we cannot create its object before the class declaration. Let's see this. Okay, it will give you an error. So let's say initial, and we do, so see it says cannot access range before initialization. That means unlike functions, you can't use classes before you declare them. Okay, let's get this out of the way. Now if you have watched my previous videos, you would know about this range class. So what we have done is we have a parse method now, which is of type static, and it uses a regular expression. It at the beginning it will look for digits followed by 3 dots and then more digits, one or more. D plus means one or more, and if it does not match, then we have a type error, and if it matches, it creates a range object by giving the first match. We parse this as a match 1, and then the second one is the match 2. That becomes start, from, and to. Now note that here there could be a problem. Okay, the problem could be that the first D plus may be less than second D plus, but for the sake of simplicity we are not going into that. Okay, so we assume that all the input will contain the left end smaller than the right end. Okay, so now what is a static method? Static method, if you are coming from languages like C++ or Java, you would know that these are called class methods. That is, they are not invoked on the objects of the class, rather they are invoked on the class. So here we invoke it on the class range, not on the object of class range. All right. So you see the left end is 1 and right end is 10. So if you say console.log and you say r dot from comma r dot to, okay, so we will see, and it will print 1 and 10. Let me comment this out. Okay, so now we will have this range object, and is there anything about this? So let's run this, and we have 1 and 10. Okay, so remember that static methods are class methods. They are invoked on the class and not on the object. That is why in Java your main function historically has been public static void main. because it can execute without a class. Although it is embedded inside a class usually, but it can execute without a class. So static can execute without an object. I said without class, no, that is without object. So static functions can exist without an object, and they can execute arbitrary code. Whatever you write will be executed. Now, what does this mean is that this means that you cannot have this dot from is equal to, let me try to do this. It is not possible here. Let me try to do it here. This dot from is equal to parse int, and we say matches 1. Okay. Since the object won't exist, it should not work, but it works in JavaScript. In this pointer will not be available without this. So in this, it will be surrounding the whatever this is available to range class. That is what it is assigning that to. Okay. So with this, we move further on to the classes. So we have a complex class. Now, this complex class has a constructor which takes real and imaginary arguments, and we set those arguments to R and I. We have a plus method which will take which we can invoke on an object, and we'll get this, and the argument of the plus will be that. So we can add the real values and imaginary values, and to multiply that, we multiply real value with real minus imaginary with imaginary. And this is typical complex calculation, and we have two static functions, sum and product, which take two classes, and then we have getters, real and imaginary and magnitude. We have discussed getters earlier also, so we can have that, and it is useful to have a toString method. And then we have the equality check on the object. We can test equality of object. Then we have class fields with the useful complex numbers. ES6 does not allow you to create fields inside the class body, so you need to create them outside. So we have some useful complex numbers, 0, 1, and the imaginary one. So you can create objects like new complex 2, 3, new complex c dot I, comma c dot r, where c was the previous object. Then we can add c plus d, and we can write that in string format. Then we have the getter magnitude, then we product, and 0 we send 0 to toString method, and we print that. Now, one of the important things you can remember is that JavaScript is prototype based inheritance. So the mechanism which we use of prototype based inheritance in JavaScript, its nature is dynamic. So any object will inherit property from its prototype, even if the prototype properties of prototype change after the object is created. This means that we can augment JavaScript classes simply by adding new methods to their prototype. So here I have created a conjugate function, okay, which negates the imaginary value, and then we have that. So we can say that console.log c.conj, you see it autocompletes dot toString. Okay, so it should negate this 3, and we should get 2 and minus 3. So you see, prototype change even after the object creation works here. C was created before this prototype change. So you can assign arbitrary methods to prototype objects, and they will work. Now this raises the question that should we modify the inbuilt types, for example, string type. Should we add the functions to string type, a prototype of string class, to satisfy certain requirements of our own? So the general idea is that you should not change the prototype of built-in types. because if you change the prototype of built-in type, you might have side effects later on in your code, because it is now not, since you will have a coding guideline that we can modify the built-in types. So if you modify at one place, you can modify at another place, and then you can modify at another place, and you will lose track of that, and that might cause conflict. So the general idea is that if you want to modify a string, then you invoke, then you create a class based on string. You extend string class, create a subclass out of string, and in that subclass you add the additional functionality. That is the best way of doing that. And prototype based inheritance facilitates that in a very nice way. In general, built-in libraries of any language you should not touch, particularly in object-oriented programming languages, because they allow you to modify the base built-in library very easily, and in a clean manner you can extend or inherit and modify the existing classes of standard library. So that is a general guideline I will give to you. And with this, we come to the end of this video, and in the next video we will focus on subclasses and how we can do various other things related to inheritance and subclasses. So I hope that you have enjoyed this video and we had something to learn from this. So with this, I will end this video here, and we will meet again after 4 days possibly to discuss subclasses of JavaScript. So thanks a lot for watching the video. Have a great day ahead. Keep learning, stay curious, and most importantly, enjoy.